Have you ever felt a chill run down your spine? Not from fear, but from a profound, unexplainable sadness. I have, and it wasn't in a quiet library or a somber movie theater. It was deep in the heart of the Pacific Northwest wilderness, face to face with something that, according to science, shouldn't exist. My story starts like many others who venture into the deep woods. I was an avid hiker, a skeptic, always armed with a logical explanation for every strange sound or shadow. The core of the wild for me was about disconnecting from the city, not about hunting for monsters. I'd heard the campfire tales of Sasquatch, of course, big, hairy, ape-like creatures roaming the forests. I'd always chuckled, dismissing them as folklore, a mix of misidentification and overactive imaginations. I couldn't have been more wrong. It was late autumn, the air crisp and carrying the scent of damp earth and pine. I was on a solo multi-day trek, miles from any marked trail, seeking that pure, untouched solitude. The first few days were uneventful, filled with the usual rhythm of hiking, the crunch of leaves under my boots, the chatter of squirrels, the majestic silence of ancient trees. But on the third evening, something shifted. The forest grew unnaturally quiet. The birds stopped singing, the insects ceased their buzzing. It was a heavy, expectant silence that made the hairs on my arms stand up. I chalked it up to an approaching storm and secured my camp, zipping myself into my tent as twilight bled into a moonless night. That's when I heard it. It wasn't a bear or a cougar. I know those sounds. This was different. It was a low, mournful call that seemed to vibrate through the very ground. It was long, drawn out, and filled with a sorrow so palpable it felt like a physical weight in the air. It was a sound of immense loneliness. It echoed through the valley unanswered. My skepticism began to crumble, replaced by a primal fear. I lay frozen in my sleeping bag, listening, my heart hammering against my ribs. The sound came again, closer this time. And then I heard the footsteps. Heavy, bipedal footfalls that snapped thick branches like twigs. This was no deer. It was something massive, walking deliberately, circling my campsite. I didn't dare breathe. My mind was racing, trying to rationalize what was happening. A prank, a very large man lost in the woods. Nothing made sense. The footsteps stopped right outside my tent. I could hear heavy, raspy breathing. I could smell a pungent, musky odor, like damp fur and wet earth, overpowering the scent of pine. I was paralyzed with terror. Every horror story I'd ever heard flashed through my mind. I was convinced this was the end. I squeezed my eyes shut, waiting for the fabric of the tent to be ripped away. But it never happened. After what felt like an eternity of listening to that labored breathing, the footsteps slowly moved away. The mournful call echoed one last time, further in the distance, before the forest fell silent once more. I didn't sleep a wink that night. At first light, I cautiously unzipped my tent. And there they were, footprints, huge human-like footprints pressed deep into the soft earth. They were at least 18 inches long, with 5 distinct toes. They were undeniably real, leading from the edge of the woods, circling my tent and disappearing back into the dense forest. My blood ran cold. The evidence was irrefutable. What I had heard, what I had smelled, was real. But as I stood there, staring at the tracks, the terror from the night before began to fade, replaced by something entirely different: empathy. I kept replaying that sound in my head, that deeply sorrowful, lonely call. It wasn't the roar of a monster. It was the cry of a solitary being searching for connection in a vast, empty wilderness. I packed up my camp with a sense of urgency, but not out of fear of being attacked. It was more like a feeling of intruding on a private grief. As I hiked out, I looked at the forest with new eyes. It wasn't just a collection of trees and animals anymore. It was a home, a sanctuary for a creature living a life of profound isolation. Imagine being the last of your kind, or one of a very few, scattered across millions of acres of wilderness. You are intelligent, aware, but utterly alone. You see the world changing around you, your habitat shrinking, and the small, noisy creatures Zeus encroaching further and further. How could you not be filled with a deep, abiding sadness? That encounter changed me forever. I went into the woods a skeptic and came out. Well, I came out a believer. But not in a monster. I believe in a relict hominid, an intelligent, elusive creature that wants nothing more than to be left alone. My experience wasn't about the thrill of a cryptid sighting. It was a deeply humanizing moment. It taught me that compassion isn't limited to our own species. When I hear people talk about hunting Sasquatch, about wanting to bring one back as a trophy, a sick feeling churns in my stomach. They haven't heard what I heard. They haven't felt that soul-crushing loneliness radiating through the forest. To hunt this creature would be like extinguishing a rare, flickering flame of consciousness for the sake of our own curiosity and ego. My goal now is not to prove their existence to the world with a blurry photo or a plaster cast. My goal is to advocate for their protection, to encourage us to preserve these last wild places. Not just for the bears and the wolves, but for the mysteries they may still hold. These creatures, if they are out there, are the ultimate outsiders. They live in the shadows of our world, and perhaps all they ask is for the dignity of being left in peace. The cry I heard that night wasn't a threat. It was a plea, a question sent out into the darkness, not for me, but for another who speaks its language. And the most heartbreaking part was the silence that followed, the unanswered call. It reminds me that the greatest mysteries of our planet aren't just about what we might find, but about what we stand to lose. It taught me that true wilderness is not a place to conquer, but a place to respect, and that the most profound encounters are the ones that leave us with more questions than answers, and a deeper sense of compassion for all living things, seen and unseen. Thanks for listening to my story. If you've ever had an experience that changed your perspective on the world, I'd love to read about it in the comments below. And if you're interested in tales from the edge of the map, don't forget to subscribe. Stay curious and stay compassionate.